What's up, guys? Today we're talking about one of my personal favorite commanders. You know he's cool because he's in my background. He's right there. He's right there. There's a little man. There's a little man right there. That's who we're building around today. This deck is extremely strong, so it doesn't usually fit my usual critiques of what I think is a fair power level 7. This is more leaning around the low mid 8s. Full disclosure. Runs a lot of strong cards that I really wouldn't run anywhere else. Jacob Hawken is a legendary creature human advisor. For 1 and a blue, he is a 0/2 that has tap, draw a card, then exile a card from your hand face down. You may look at that card for as long as it remains exiled. You may pay 4 and 2 blue. If you do, transform Jacob Hawken, Investigator. Then he becomes a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library face down. You may look at that card for as long as it remains exiled. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land or cast a spell from among those cards without paying its mana cost. Free spells, always pretty rad. The goal of this deck is to overwhelm our opponents with just bomb after bomb after bomb. At the end of this video, I will tell you ways to make it weaker and ways to make it stronger, if you so choose. But my current build is slightly above the middle. Let me explain a little on how Jacob works in layman's terms. Basically, he's a 0/2 that has tap, draw a card, then exile a card into his little spooky pile. Then when you flip him, you have access to those spooky pile cards, and you are able to play one of them on your own turn for free. Now, it is either a land or a spell. You do not get both. In addition, if he leaves the battlefield and returns, let's say he dies and you recast him, access to the previously spooky piled cards are not available. They do not have counters on them, so they are just gone. But that's fine, because if you flip him, you get 1 guaranteed spell because you retain priority. After flipping him, no one can interact with you until you cast a spell from that pile. So you at least get 1 big spooky thing. Why I like this deck so much is it lets me play cards that I would never ever play because there's so much mana. The average curve of this deck is a whopping 6.5. That's more than double the average curve of a deck. And the reason is because when we're flipping Jacob and he's getting a new card every upkeep, we don't want to have something trivial like a 1 or a 2 drop for free. That's kind of low value. So if we make our deck dense with high CMC cards, we can guarantee to cast a free one every turn on top of whatever we're casting normally. So because this is a blue deck, you might be thinking, let's run a billion counterspells. Well, counterspells aren't exactly the best for Jacob. If you exile a counterspell off the top with his ability, that's nearly a wasted card, because then you only get access to that counterspell on your own turn, which isn't the worst, because you can then cast a big haymaker, and if they try to interact with it or counter it, throughout the whole turn you do have a free counterspell, so it's not the worst thing. But ideally you want to be able to cast a free 7 drop from your Jacob pile, and then 1 from your hand. Just sure, they'll remove a few of them, but they're going to run out of removal before you run out of top of your deck. So they'll eventually get overrun with crazy stuff. You might be asking, you surely don't want to play him turn 2 and then wait till turn 6 to flip him. That's not a very good deal. True. That's why we're running a lot of mana rocks to offset that. Such as, Thrawn Dynamo, Mox Amber, your typical pile of mana rocks to accelerate you. Ideally, in a perfect world, you want to be flipping him around turn 4 or 5. And then you're able to cast a big free spell that's also ideally more than 6 mana. Like We have the newer Titans in here, which is Emrakul, Kozilek, and Ulamog. We are not running the old Titans, because Annihilator is not a fun mechanic. But some of the things in here aren't super fun either. Part of the reason I love this deck so much is that it's so interchangeable. Nothing is like, you need this card for this synergy. It's just, that's a big blue card, I want to play it. And this is the deck to do so. Running crazy high costing things like Mnemonic Deluge and Aminato's Augury, and just crazy things like that. Here's a few cherry picks of my favorite cards in this deck that are just really goofy and fun. Ancient Silver Dragon is normally 8 mana, but for us it's a low price of 0, which is a great way to get in that slab. Sphinx Ambassador, one of my personal favorite cards in all of Magic. Whenever it connects to a person, you look through their entire deck and pick out a card, face down. They have to guess what it is, and if they're wrong and it's a creature, you just steal it. It just comes right on the battlefield for you. The secret is, you want to pick their second best creature. Tomb of Horrors Adventurer is an awesome card. Sure, 6 mana for a 4/4 does feel a little weak, and you have to complete its dungeon to do its really crazy thing, but you really don't need its really crazy thing. Its normal crazy thing is plenty crazy. The second spell you cast each turn is completely copied. So because we're almost certainly casting 2 spells a turn, one from our spooky pile and one from our hand, we can layer whichever one is more important and get 2 copies of it for free, in addition to, the initiative being introduced in the game. We have a lot of evasive dudes, we can always take it back. Aminato's Augury is a must. Our deck has such a high mana curve that this card can, no joke, hit roughly about an average of 30 mana's worth of value. And we can cast this thing as early as turn 4, if we're lucky. That's an insane amount of value that our opponents will honestly likely just scoop to if you cast it on turn 4. Inundate is a board wipe that only hits our opponent's stuff, which is always nice. A nice little rule of thumb is if you flip him, your opponents probably have better creatures and you no longer have a creature to block with, so pairing that with an immediate board wipe is usually a helpful strat. Knowledge Exploitation is a very fun card. It lets you search your opponent's deck for any instant sorcery and cast it for free. Wow. They're playing an artifact deck and they happen to be running Farewell? Well, farewell to all their stuff. Mnemonic Deluge is also an awesome include. You just pick the best instant sorcery in anyone's graveyard and cast it 3 times. If you pair it with our previous card, you can put their best instant sorcery in their graveyard by casting it, and then just copy it 3 times. Modal counterspells like Sublime Epiphany, Mystic Confluence, and Cryptic Command are all fantastic in this deck because if they are ripped with Jacob, you have something to do with them other than just counterspell. We have a few low-to-the-ground counterspells just to pad out people trying to remove our commander, but you can honestly do with less. This deck is a lot more counterspell heavy than most of my decks. A strong way to build this deck is to build an extra turns tribal. I'm not a big fan of that, because I definitely don't want to sit through someone taking a 10-minute turn, but I also want to have at least one. So rather than running the absurdly powerful time stretch, we're just running one that prevents us from decking ourselves, which can possibly be a problem, and that's Nexus of Fate, which is just an instant speed to take an extra turn. You can use this to intercept the turn order. Curse of Unbinding is a very fun card. You put it either on the person with the fewest creatures, or you put it on the player with the biggest creatures, like a dragon deck or something. The reason you'd put it on the player with the smallest creatures is if they only have 1 or 2 creatures in their deck, or even, God forbid, 0, you can deck them out pretty quickly. And if you put it on the biggest creature deck, you get a free Big Dong Honker every single turn. It's pretty good. Extravagant Replication is another goofy one. It lets you copy your best permanent every single turn, and we're playing some pretty big dumb stuff. So being able to copy those for free every turn, that can get out of hand real quick. And my final recommendation is Sphinx of the Second Sun. At the beginning of your end step, you get an additional beginning step, which includes upkeep, which we can add a new card to our Jacob pile, get an untap so we can be ready to protect our Jacob, and a draw, because draws are always nice. The strength of this deck is definitely its insane mid to late game power. It can churn out multiple 7-8 drops each turn, and that can be very hard to fight through. In addition, this deck is very flexible. You can kind of just throw anything you want in there, as long as you are consistently hitting big CMC haymakers. Weakness of the deck is that if Jacob is constantly removed, then you have to keep recasting him. 4, 6, 8. He's not worth 8. If you have to pay 8 for him, just don't cast him. Think of it like he has 3 lives. He's just not worth it. But if he's able to stick around, he gets a lot of value. Another weakness to this deck would simply be that it's kind of slow, and you need that mid to late game to crush your opponents. Luckily, you have what I like to affectionately call Pity Armor. Pity Armor is when you aren't doing anything to really develop your board state quickly, nor hurting anyone. I'm much more worried about the guy with 20 elves than I am with the Jacob with 2 mana rocks. So people are more likely to go after the elf guy, thus, Pity Armor. So here's the part you wanted, you degenerates. If you want to make this deck even stronger, you can run cards that, again, I'm not running, but this would be a certain way to make it more powerful. To include cards like Omniscience, more extra turn spells, and of course, Annihilator Titans.
Don't do that.
Now, if you want to make this deck a little weaker, or more budget-friendly, you can remove some of the more expensive cards and replace them with cheaper haymakers like Stormtide Leviathan, Scourge of Fleets, Phyrexian Ingester, Sphinx of Athun, Tidal Force. These are all cards that are financially cheap with a big impact. Want to replace some of my crazy expensive counterspells? No problem. We got Rewind, Negate, Slip Out the Back, Unwind. These are just some cheaper ones that you can run instead of my extremely expensive ones. The reason this deck is so pricey is because I've been building this deck over the course of probably about 10 years, back when the commander was Nezahal. I don't think it's 10 years, I think I'm exaggerating. In conclusion, this deck is very fun, very strong. Free spells are always strong. So be careful with how you build it. Make sure your opponents are okay with anything super dirty you put in. And just have a fun time flipping off big, huge dummies. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. If you can think of some fun, big blue cards you can add to the deck, by all means, put them in the comment section below. We can discuss them. They might have been in my previous list of this deck. But again, thanks for watching. Have a nice day.